Okay, you guys, we got something to watch. I had given up on this trial because they weren't doing any of the hearings, and I didn't think it was going to be streamed. And you guys know how excited I was about this trial. Okay, I got a Phil Flash fan in. Okay, these two old guys, I forgot what county. I even took down, I had a sticky note that had the guy's name, the case file number, everything. And I took it down and threw it away the other day because I thought we weren't going to get to see this one. Okay, two guys. They are older guys. I don't even remember the county. I think it was Hillsborough. It's Florida. They hung out at the dog park every day. And one of these guys, he was gay. And when he came out, he told all his friends at the dog park. And uh, Gerald Radford, he went over to the guy and he's like, "Oh, that's great, man. You shouldn't have to hide who you are. You should be able to live the way you want, love who you want. However, they had some kind of a falling out, I guess. Or maybe they weren't really friends in the first place. I'm not sure. But they didn't get along. And I can't remember the victim's name. His last name was Lay, I think. He has recordings from previous times where they'd gotten into arguments, and Radford had used slurs against him. I think he called him the F word. I'm not sure because I haven't seen those. Because the only pretrial hearing that we saw was the parts of the stand your ground hearing because he said that it was self defense. But they're charging him not only with murder but a hate crime. And he said, um, they they're charging him with a hate crime, but he said it had nothing to do with him being gay. He just didn't like the guy. That they didn't like each other, and he came at him first, and he defended himself. So the reason why I'm interested in this is because is it a hate crime? Really, is it a hate crime? Did he kill him because he hated him because he was gay? Or did he just hate him? Like, why should he get the aggravated charge of a hate crime if it wasn't actually because he was gay? Maybe he just hated him because he hated him and it had nothing to do with the fact that he was gay. So, do, do you know what I mean? Am I making the hate crime distinction clear? You know, is the Uber Eats case? Is that really big guy with all the tattoos on his face? Okay, it looks like this is the morning. We're gonna be playing catch up for a while, and I'm gonna have to figure out. You know, no, I'm not even gonna say anything about that. What in the world? What are you doing? I don't know. Possibly. But sometimes you say something just to hurt somebody. So I want to hear the evidence before I say just because he said it, it meant that he was homophobic. I am not homophobic,
The
by the way.
state's charging document, which I read from yesterday, that's called an information, is not evidence. And it's not to be your job and my job are very different in this regard and do not overlap. And this is one of our fundamental principles of our system of justice. So let me explain briefly how the trial will be conducted. At the beginning of the trial, the lawyers have an opportunity to make opening statements to you. Now, lawyers are not witnesses, so what they say is not testimony, but
Yeah,
opening statements are intended to tell you what
for
they think the case will be during the course of the trial. After opening statements, witnesses will be called, they'll be examined and cross examined by the lawyers. Evidence will also be admitted during the course of the proceedings. After all evidence has been presented, I will read you the instructions on the law. You also will have your own set of written jury instructions, so it's not a civics test that you have to memorize. You'll have your own set of instructions to use during closing arguments and during your deliberations. The lawyers then have another opportunity to address you in closing arguments, and after that, you'll retire to consider your verdict. You should not form any definite or fixed opinion on the merits of this case until you've heard all of the evidence, the arguments of the lawyers, and the instructions on the law that I give you. Until that time, you must not discuss this case among yourselves. Your verdict must be based solely on the evidence or lack of evidence in the law. You must decide this case without distraction and only on the evidence presented here in the courtroom. You cannot do any investigation of your own. This includes reading newspapers, watching TV, using a computer, cell phone, internet, any electronic device, or any other means at all to get information related to this case or the people and places involved in this case. You cannot visit places mentioned in the trial or use the internet to look at maps or pictures or to see any place discussed during the trial. If you do make these investigations, research, or inquiries of your own, I have no way to make sure the information that you obtain is proper and even accurate. And the parties likewise have no opportunity to evaluate what you're considering. So please do not communicate about this case with anyone, including close family or friends, even your fellow jurors. No communication includes no in person, telephonic, electronic communication, texting, emailing, posting information on social media or a website or any other forms of communication. During the trial, as I explained yesterday, we will take recesses. You'll be permitted to separate and go about your personal affairs. It's important to remember all of these communication rules apply during all of those recesses. It's important that you keep those juror badges on during the course of your stay here at the courthouse. As you've seen, we share common entrances, lobbies, elevators with witnesses, lawyers, etc. So don't put yourself in the position that you overhear people who might be mentioning things about the trial. Of course, if anyone attempts to have a discussion about the trial in your presence, tell one of our bailiffs immediately. Your cell phones, computers, tablets, ringing, iWatches, all of that type of stuff should be turned off while you're here in the courtroom. Off means really off. Is off, it still annoys the person sitting next to you. And again, the reason for this is that everyone can pay 100% attention without distraction in the jury book. Um, I'll just remind you, in every criminal proceeding, a defendant has the absolute right to remain silent. At no time is it a duty of a defendant to prove his innocence. From the exercise of a defendant's right to remain silent, a jury may never draw any inference of guilt. And the fact that a defendant chose not to testify in his case cannot affect your verdict in any way whatsoever. The attorneys here are trained in the rules of evidence and trial procedure, so it's their duty and really obligation to make legal objections that they believe are proper. How that's going to work: when an objection is made, usually after a question is asked, I'll either sustain the objection, which means the witness will not be allowed to answer the question, or I'll overrule the objection, which means the witness will be allowed to answer the question. If I do not allow the witness to answer, you shouldn't try to speculate on why or what the witness might have said. It's a legal determination that I've made that it's not proper for you to hear. Likewise, don't hold it against the attorneys for making objections that they're both doing what they believe is appropriate in the circumstances. Also, during the trial, it might be necessary to confer with them outside of your presence. You saw a little bit of that yesterday when they come up here, conversations that you don't hear, but we are electronically enhanced. So if you are picking up our conversation, just let one of the bailiffs, there'll always be a bailiff sitting right there next to you, let them know so that we can adjust our volume here. I did tell you that you are able to take notes if you want to. For your convenience, I think by your chairs we have some sort of plastic container with a notebook and writing utensil. Do they have? Yes. See them looking around. All right. Good. So a couple of things about note taking. One, you're not required to take notes, so don't feel like you have to if you do not want to. Secondly, please don't become so consumed with taking notes that you forget to listen to the next question and answer that's coming along. Sometimes when we're furiously writing, we kind of tune out to what's happening, so please be on the lookout for that. Additionally, rest assured that they're for your use and your use alone. As you see, we have them labeled with your juror numbers. When you're not using them, the bailiffs keep them locked up. I'm actually required by law to shred them at the conclusion of the trial, so no one reads them. They don't become a part of this court record or anything like this. Additionally, if one of you is a way better note taker than everyone else, that does not mean he or she becomes the official court reporter once you get into the jury room to deliberate. Sometimes people write things down wrong or not accurately. So if your memory differs from the written notes of someone else, I'm going to ask you to rely on your own memory. That's why you've been individually chosen as jurors in the first place. Just another procedural tidbit. If you do happen to miss a question or an answer, or a witness is mumbling or speaking too low and you can't hear something that's said, please feel free to raise your hand or just shout out, please repeat that, because I've told you that you can't talk to each other about what's happening here in the courtroom. So in ordinary times, we would turn to our friend and say, hey, did she say black or white? And since I've told you you can't do that, it's important that you get it the first time around. So please don't feel inhibited at all. It happens all the time. We'd rather have you interrupt us and make sure that you get the question or the answer the first time around. So please don't feel bad about doing that at all. You're not interrupting or us at all. Additionally, some jurors ask if they can ask questions during the course of a trial. The answer is no. In a criminal case, the state's required to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, and having jurors ask is akin to helping them out in that regard. And so it's not really proper for jurors to ask questions during a criminal. We'll have it started.
Fucking faggot.
Whoa.
That's the words of the defendant in this case,
Whoa.
Gerald Radford. You're going to hear that once his relationship, his friendship with the victim in this case, John Walter Lay deteriorated every time he saw the victim coming to the dog park they both frequent. That fucking faggot. You will hear Gerald Radford on a recorded phone call talking about a time that he interacted with the victim to his face and said, I told him to his face, there's gay people and there's fags. Gay people live their lives about the statements that Gerald Radford said. You're going to hear multiple statements that Gerald Radford gave. And you're going to hear things like Gerald Radford would say things like, I want to punch him right in the face, talking about the victim. You'll hear him talk about, he told the victim, I'll break your fucking jaw. You'll hear that the defendant said, I want to fucking kill him. And the day before, 24 hours before John Walter Lay is killed, the defendant is yelling at him, you're going to die. You're going to die. Those are the words of the defendant. Ladies and gentlemen, you may be asking yourself, how does it ever get to that? And so we'll rewind time a little bit as we talk about what happened in this case and what the evidence will show you, largely from the mouth of the defendant himself, but also from a variety of people who also frequented this dog park, is that there was a group of people. They went to this place called West Dog Park. It's a big dog park. It's a nice place. It's in a community. It's over by Lakeville High School. And they all come in the morning and they hang out and they walk their dogs. And there was like a little group of people that hang out. Gerald Radford, the victim, were two of those people. And for a time, they were friendly. All these people hung out. They had a good time. But you will discover that there became a change in the interaction between the defendant and the victim. You will hear about how they started to have disagreements that were largely centered around matters of politics. It's 2020, it's 2021, it's 2022. We're all living through COVID and mask mandates and vaccines and a whole lot of hot button issues that at the time everybody was real fired up about. And so you will hear that as these two men are having different views on these topics and other topics, you will learn that the defendant becomes the aggressive, hostile one. He's the guy saying fucking faggot. And you will hear from people at the park who will say the victim never got angry, never got hostile, never got aggressive. Eventually, he kind of hit the boiling point and he was like, we can't keep doing this. Like, I can't endure this forever. But Mr. Radford persisted. And you will hear from people who were there, who told Mr. Radford to his face, you can't talk to people like that. It's 2024. You can't run around calling people fucking faggots. And still, he persisted. He increased the aggression. He increased the hostility. You will hear how people saw him going up to the victim and blocking his path as if to provoke a fight. And you will hear how Mr. Radford was always very clever to say, but I'm not going to be the guy who starts the fight with the gay guy. So we're going to fast forward eventually to February 2nd, 2024. That's the day that this murder is alleged to have occurred. It's early in the morning. His dog, he goes to the park, he walks around, and as it turns out, that same morning, as so often happens, Mr. Lay shows up with his dog, and he actually has another dog that he's dog sitting, and he comes to the park. Right off the bat, Mr. Radford is going to say, the victim was saying something to me, I don't even know what he said, and I started telling him, why don't you get out of here? I was here first. This is my park. You should go. Nobody likes you. And of course, an argument starts. And that's where the heart of this case is going to come up. Because in this case, the defendant is going to claim self-defense. Gerald Radford shot and killed John Walter Lay. Mr. Lay was not armed with a knife or a baseball bat or a gun or anything remotely resembling a deadly weapon. And he shot him. And you're going to have to decide whether or not he did that legally. And at the end of the trial, the judge will explain to you what the self-defense laws are. And I expect you will hear something like, the defendant must have reasonably believed that he was either going to die or suffer great bodily harm. And there will be pictures, plenty of pictures of the defendant. He'll have a few cuts and scrapes on his face. No broken bones, no shattered teeth, no fractured nose, no broken arms. You'll have to decide whether or not he reasonably believed that he needed to shoot John Walter Lay to prevent death or great bodily harm. But I will submit to you that Mr. Radford's claim of self-defense will fail because it will be clear to you from all of the history, from both the words of the people who shared the dog park, but even from the defendant himself, that the person who was the aggressor, the person who most reasonably would have started the entire fight, was the defendant. And you will hear that if the defendant is the aggressor, if he's the guy committing a crime, then he would have had a duty to retreat. He can't pull a gun, he's got to try and get away. Because you can't start a fight and then be upset that you get your butt kicked in a fight and say, I'm going to shoot somebody. Now, the state of Florida's burden is going to be murder in the second degree. And there are a few elements. There are the things that sort of make up the concept of murder in the second degree. The first one is the victim must be dead. That's an easy one. I'm going to show you autopsy photos of John Walter Lay. I'm going to show you the spot in his chest where he has the gunshot wound that killed him. And I'm going to show you an array of injuries that he suffered to his head and body in the course of the fight. We'll have a doctor come tell you about the autopsy. He's dead. It's even so much an easy thing to do. The defense has actually stipulated, you will see the stipulation that John Walter Lay is dead. That one's easy. The defendant caused the death. That's the second element. Well, the defendant is telling you that he caused the death. That's what self-defense is. I did it, but ... I was allowed to.
Like that.
And so I submit to you that when you decide the defendant did not act in self-defense, you will ultimately conclude that the defendant caused the death because that's the only obvious answer. And so what will be left is what is in the heart and the mind of Gerald Radford at the time of the killing. You will hear this phrase about an act imminently dangerous, evidencing a depraved mind. That's a long sentence of words that you'll get. And there will be a definition. And what you will hear are the words ill will, hatred, spite, or an evil intent. And I submit to you now, and I will argue to you at the end of this trial, that the person with hate in their heart is that man, Gerald Radford. He's the aggressor. He's the hostile one. He's the disrespectful one. He's the words of hate. Now, I told you you're going to hear a lot of interviews in this case, and I want to explain to you how the case is going to unfold so you understand what's coming. The case basically starts with a 911 call. You will eventually get the 911 call, and that triggers the response of members of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. The first witness you're going to hear very shortly.
Okay, Flash, my sweetie, I know you still support me. I was just teasing you yesterday, but I'm glad you showed up. Okay, have a safe trip. Have fun. I'll see you when you get back.
Is Deputy Craig Hoffman. He's one of the first responding deputies to the scene. He arrives at the dog park. He's one of the first people to have any interaction with the defendant. You'll be able to see the defendant as he's originally found. And then pretty quickly, you will see Deputy Hoffman attempt to go render aid to Mr. Lay, who's laying on the ground dying. Mr. Lay's dog, confused in the moment, is barking at the deputy, trying to defend his owner, not understanding what's happening. You'll watch that interaction. And then eventually you will watch two deputies try and provide life-saving efforts to Mr. Lay before they just say he's not breathing. We're not going to make you watch the entirety of it, but you will watch those moments where deputies try to save Mr. Lay's life. And as you do, I want you to pay careful attention to where Mr. Lay is laying on the ground, because you're going to discover that there's actually a spot where Mr. Lay is laying, and then there's another spot where there's some items, some mugs and sunglasses and things. And that's going to become important, the distinction of those two locations, the distance between them. So you're going to hear about that. Once the scene is initially some sort of stability is established, detectives are called in. You're going to hear from Detective Kelsey Nix. Detective Nix is what's called the scene detective. She's going to come and talk with you about all the things that are discovered at the scene. You're going to see the cell phone that Gerald Radford had in his hand. You're going to see a speaker that he was wearing on his belt. And I want you to listen carefully to the 911 call and see if you hear music on the 911 call. And I also want you to listen carefully to the video from Deputy Hoffman when he first responds and see if music is playing. Because what I think you're going to see is you're going to see that Mr. Radford was not concussed. He was not frantic. He was not panicked. He was not responding to some emotional trauma. He actually had bothered to turn music back on while he was waiting for the police to show up. But it wasn't on while the 911 call was going. So she'll talk to you about those things. You'll see the gun. Mr. Radford did call 911. That's the 911 call you're going to hear. He had taken his gun. He had put it on the table. He had unloaded it. He had waited for the police. And so you'll see those items and talk about that. Then we'll talk about that other area that I talked about. You're going to see in the dog park, there's like a water trough area for like dogs to drink water when they're at the park. And right near there, there's a series of items. You're going to discover there's a bright blue, like mug, like one of those things you screw the top on to keep your coffee warm, like a thermos sort of thing. That's the victim's mug. You're going to see a darker blue thermos mug. That's the defendant's mug. You're going to see that the handle is broken off of the defendant's mug. And you're also going to see a pair of sunglasses, which the defendant ultimately identifies as his, laying on the ground. And as you watch the video and you look at the pictures, I really want you to pay attention to the ground. And I want you to ask yourself what you can see in those pictures and what you know of just what the sand and dirt is like anywhere in the state of Florida, but especially in Hillsborough County. Because what you're going to see is on the sunglasses, they have dirt all over them. But the mug doesn't. The gun doesn't. The cell phone, the speakers don't. You're going to see pictures of Mr. Radford. You'll see the injuries. I'm not going to suggest he didn't suffer any injuries. He's got some little cuts and scrapes to his bridge of his nose and above his eye and under his cheek and a little thing over here near his collarbone. You're going to see those things. But you're going to see that Gerald Radford doesn't have a speck of dirt anywhere on him. You will hear Gerald Radford, when he's interviewed by law enforcement, tell the police, tell the sheriff's office, I got a mouthful of dirt while we were rolling around on the ground fighting. He doesn't have a speck of dirt on his face anywhere. You'll see his jeans. There's no dirt there. Not from rolling on the ground, struggling. Because what Gerald Radford is going to say is he's going to say that basically Mr. Lay, the guy who had never been the aggressor, who had never been hostile, today was the day that he decided to attack Mr. Radford, to ambush him, to hit him in the face with his mug, knock him to the ground, and that two grown men rolled around on the ground. And while Mr. Radford was pinned on the ground, he was able to draw the concealed firearm he was carrying on his right hip with his right hand. And what he will tell police is that when he initially draws that gun, he does the most instinctual thing. He immediately points it at the victim and he shoots him. And since he's right-handed, shooting at somebody who's facing him, he would shoot him on the left side. You will watch Gerald Radford literally demonstrate to the police, I shot him over here. Problem for Gerald Radford is the gunshot's over here. It's not in a position that makes any sense. And I will go to great lengths when the medical examiner is on to explain to you how medical examiners can literally open a human body and follow the path of a bullet through a body. So the medical examiner can tell you not only that the bullet goes here and comes to rest down here, but that angle is downward, meaning that gun is up here, pointing downward. It's not here, pointing at the left side of the victim, as Mr. Radford initially tells the police. And that's what you're going to discover. What you're going to discover is that Gerald Radford gives multiple statements. He makes a 911 call. He gives an initial hour-long interview with police. He goes back to the scene with them. He does a walkthrough. It's on video. You'll get to watch it. A week later, they interview him again. A month later, they interview him again. And in every instance, there starts being new facts and changes to the facts that he's told. Gerald Radford will tell you that he was concussed and was so out of it that in the moment, he didn't remember all the facts. But as time went by, more facts came along. But listen to the facts that come along as the interviews and the moments progress. Because what you'll discover is that we'll get multiple interviews into this before Gerald Radford ever says anything like, oh, the victim had his finger on the trigger. The victim was trying to pull the trigger to shoot me. You won't hear that in the first initial interviews. Mr. Radford will very clearly demonstrate, I drew the gun with my right hand, I immediately pointed it up, and I fired. And somehow later, that will transform into the victim got his hands on the gun, both hands on the gun, and we were fighting over the gun, and now he's got his finger on the trigger, and he's trying to turn the gun towards me, and I somehow magically can disengage the safety and shoot him before he can do anything. So you will have to pay careful attention to what is said and when it is said, and how the details change as the case progresses. But there are also going to be some things that are just glaringly obvious to you. In the first interview with Mr. Radford, sitting down with detectives, the longest interview he gives, he says the following: I never did anything to him. I never insulted him. I talked to him and treated him with respect, just like everybody else. That's the same Gerald Radford who will admit he called the victim a fucking faggot to his face. I swear to God, I never did a damn thing to that guy, and I don't know why he started on me. Well, you will discover that not so long ago, in a separate proceeding, Mr. Radford gave some testimony. And finally, about 2 months ago, Gerald Radford told us what this fight was really all about. You see, Gerald Radford and John Walter Lay were friends. Mr. Lay is a gay man. One day, Mr. Lay made the mistake of asking the defendant out for a beer on a date.
Oh.
And you will hear Mr. Radford say that. In fact, when we read the transcript, you will hear Mr. Radford first say, well, I was told I wasn't supposed to volunteer information. And I say, no, please, tell us whatever. And he admits that that's what the real dispute was. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about COVID, mask mandates, vaccines. I'm sure those things happen too. But you will hear Gerald Radford tell you that what really dissolved their friendship, what really set us down the path of fucking faggot, I'll break your jaw, I want to kill him, you're going to die?
Oh, gee.
Is that a gay man asked him out?
You say no, thank you. I'm not interested.
Gerald Radford also said, no, I don't think I ever threatened him. And at the back end of this trial, I will bring up a half dozen people who were all at that park, and they will tell you that in the days and the weeks leading up to this shooting, Gerald Radford was getting out of control. They will tell you that they were trying to intervene. They will tell you that they saw him aggressively approaching the victim, and they were worried that something was going to happen, and they were trying to talk reason to him, and it just wasn't having it. Ultimately, as I said, you will have to make a decision about whether or not the defendant acted in self-defense. And I submit to you that, ladies and gentlemen, self-defense is rooted in fear. You must be afraid you are going to die. You must be afraid someone is going to cause great bodily harm to you, not cuts and scratches on your face. And so you will literally hear it from the horse's mouth. When Gerald Radford is asked, during this incident, were you in fear? His response is, what's fear? I didn't want to get my ass kicked. Yeah, I thought he was going to kick my ass. And still, the detectives take a second try at asking him, during this altercation, at any point were you in fear for your life? Well, after I got blood on my face, I was kind of scared. Yeah. You're going to hear Gerald Radford unprompted basically say the following: I should have just let him kick my ass and be done with it.
You think?
I just needed him to stop beating me up. That's what I needed. When asked, Gerald Radford is not going to be on video saying, I thought I was going to die. Oh, he'll get to that later. He'll keep changing the facts. But in the first initial statements, he won't say, I thought I was going to die. He won't say, I thought he was going to kill me. He won't even say, I thought he was going to break my nose or pound my face in or, whatever. And so when this trial proceeds, I ask that you start and always think about what is the ultimate question that I submit to you will be at the end of this case. What was in the mind of Gerald Radford when he pulled the trigger and shot John Walter Lay? Was it fear? Was it the fear of death or great bodily harm? Or was it hate? And I submit to you at the end of this trial, you will find the defendant guilty as charged because you will decide everything tells you he had hate in his heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the defense like to make an opening statement at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
May it please the court, morning court staff, counsel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. There are two sides to every story. And I know that that sounds cliche, but it's true. And what the state just told you is a story. It's their theory of what happened. And so now, using that same evidence, I'm going to tell you the story. And I'm going to tell you Mr. Radford's story. Because in this story, there are two men and two sides. Everyone, this is Gerald Radford. He is the man that sits before you, presumed innocent. He goes by Deck. People call him Deck. That's his nickname. And Deck, he was born in Ireland and spent most of his life being raised in New Jersey before settling down here in Florida with his wife. And he's been down here now for about 13 years. He has 3 sons, and of course he has his 4-legged babies. Mr. Radford is a veteran. He's an ex-Marine. And like many ex-military, he carries a firearm for protection. This is Florida. This is not unusual. So as you see, he's just a common man doing common things, going to the dog park every day, living a very common, quiet life. And that all came crashing down on February 2nd, 2024. It is a tragic day that has impacted the lives of 2 men forever. And the 2 men involved, Mr. Diaz is right, they were friendly, they were cordial, most importantly, they were peaceful. But unfortunately, as we stand here today, Mr. Lay, the other man in the story, he's no longer with us. But as you know, this story starts way before February 2nd, 2024. Both Deck, as he goes by, and Walt, Mr. Lay goes by Walt, were longtime regulars at this West Tampa dog park, nearly daily, same time in the morning. And there was a group of people there that were all friendly and got along and talked. And they became known as the morning crew. But you'll hear that around the time when COVID was becoming our life, that a rift began between Deck and Walt. And I'm sure you can remember in your memories very keenly what life became like during COVID and how polarizing it became. COVID was politicized, and many people, maybe even your loved ones and friends, you didn't see eye to eye on. And that's where this started. Okay, it's not about a date. It's about varying a misalignment of ideology. And unfortunately, the people at the dog park, the morning crew, they, just like the rest of society, kind of fell victim to this cleavage of ideology, and they began to splinter. And as they did so, the group kind of split down ideological lines, quote unquote, liberals and conservatives, right? And they would no longer sit together, stand together and talk, commingle. That had kind of ended. Now, my client, Deck, not shy about his views. Not going to pretend that he is. And some people may call these views harsh or extreme. Maybe you don't share them, maybe I don't share them, but they're not uncommon views. And when he expresses these views, yeah, he uses horrible language, horrible, vulgar language that you and I probably today would not use. But Deck, he's from another time. Jersey, he's a Yankee. He's from a different place. Okay, he grew up in the 60s and 70s. And that's a time when using a word like faggot was commonplace. It was like calling somebody ugly. It was just an insult. When I was a kid, and I'm dating myself now, but we tossed around the word gay a lot. And that had no implication of homosexuality. It was just a word. These are words, just insults. It is not, I implore you, indicative of a person who hates an entire subsection of our culture, let alone drive you to murder. And we concede that the state's going to parade many people before you. And it's going to be ad nauseum. You're going to hear the same thing over and over again. He uses this language. We know that. His views are harsh. We know that. He's aggressive. He's in your face. We know that. Well, Deck himself will tell you, I'm an asshole. I can be an asshole. So from the time of COVID on, this animosity begins to grow because Walt and Deck definitely do not see eye to eye. And Walt does not like the use of the slurs. But what you won't hear is at any point it becoming physical. Over those years, despite what was said, the horrible things that might have been said, it was never physical. So despite the bickering, and you can't tell me there wasn't bickering back and forth, despite that, Walt and Deck never got physical. Well, obviously that changed. That changed on February 2nd. And what started as a normal morning for these two men, taking their dogs to the dog park like they do every day for years, would turn deadly. And that morning, at that time, there was only two people in that park, Deck and Walt. So there are no eyewitnesses. And there's no surveillance, and that's large in part due to a failure in the police investigation. So there's nobody that can tell us what happened that day except for Mr. Radford. So you are going to be forced to either rely on the state's version of events or the events as they occurred by somebody who was actually there. And we believe that the evidence you're going to see supports the fact that an altercation was started by Walter and Declan was forced to defend himself. According to Dec, he was the first one at the park. And Dec, at this time, had sadly just lost one of his dogs. And these dogs are like children to Dec, okay? And he was really struggling. And he was especially melancholy. And he was even more alienated from this group of mourning folks that got together because of the tragedy of losing his dog. He wasn't interacting with anybody. He was keeping to himself. And obviously, at some point there soon after, Walt arrived at the park with his two dogs. And now, it's going to be important to look at when you see the evidence and you see the pictures of the dog park, that when you pull up to the dog park in your car, not only can you see the parking lot and who's there and see whose car is there, but you can see the whole park. And so it would have been plainly obvious to Walt that not only was Declan in the park, but it was just going to be the two of them. Now, unfortunately, Walt's not here to tell us what caused the next decisions that he made or what he was doing. But we believe that he was fed up with the bullcrap at the dog park. He's fed up with it. Tired of the arguing. Tired of it. And when he sees Dec there, he makes a beeline for him. And Dec is over by those washing tubs that Mr. Diaz talked about. And coming at him, Walt could have made the decision to walk around this platform and go to the other side. But instead, he walks around to the same side that Declan's on. And as he does this, he says to him, "Why do you come here? We fucking hate you here." Dec says some time passes, and before he knows it, whack, he's hit in the face with some object. And Dec was knocked to the ground, and the next thing you know, Walter is over the top of him. And he is using part of his body to pin down Declan's left leg. Well, we surmise that it was in that fall, in that initial scuffle, that Declan, when falling to the ground, dropped and broke his mug. So once they're down on the ground, Walt began to, what Dex referred to as hammer fisting. So hit it, striking him like this. Now remember, he's over the top of him. He's not punching him directly. He's beating down on him like this, over and over and over again. And this is consistent, by the way, with the evidence you're going to see, including bruising to the outer part of Walt's hands and lots of it, covering what you wind up seeing are pretty deep abrasions on the knees of Walt, which tells us he was on his knees over Declan. So now you have this larger man, taller man, 13 years his junior, over the top of him, beating him, raining down these fists. And he does sustain multiple injuries to his face. And the face is covered in blood. At this time, he is completely helpless. He is overpowered, and he is being hit over and over. And you'll see the pictures of his injury, and you'll see the blood, and you'll see it's nothing short of a vicious attack. And this goes on for, Dex seems to think, and sometimes it's hard to gauge time when things like this are happening, but he believes about 15 to 20 more seconds of this, and there's no sign of it stopping. And of course he feared for his life in that moment. He is completely powerless against this man. And that left him with no choice but to try to retrieve his firearm that he carried for personal. And Deck is able to manipulate and move over and get that firearm. And he brings that firearm and gets that 9mm up to the side of about the mid torso of Walt. And that's when they begin to struggle over this gun. They both have their hands on the gun, and it's twisting, and it's moving, and it's up, and it's down. And then there's a loud bang, a bright light, and Declan has shot Walt. Now, there's a few things I want to point out about the struggle that took place, the evidence I want you to pay attention to. One, you're going to see that there's mixed DNA on the gun. 2 people touched that gun. There is DNA from 2 people on that gun, telling you 2 people had to have touched it. Walter's injuries are consistent. The bruising in the knees of him being over top of Walter. And you will see pictures of Deck afterwards. And you will, if you look close enough, I did, that's my job, you will see debris at the bottom of his pants. But also what they failed to tell you is they took those pictures after he changed his clothes. He was wearing something completely different when law enforcement showed up. And the sweatshirt that he was in was taken not for evidence, not to be preserved. It was tossed in the back of a police cruiser. Declan doesn't have any injuries to his hands. They're clean. And as far as the trajectory of this bullet, we believe it is consistent with being shot from being over the top of somebody. Now, I predict that Mr. Diaz is going to get up with the medical examiner and they're going to grab a skeleton and they're going to move the gun all around and they're going to try, well, it could have come from this way, it could have come from that way. And, you know, it's pointed down, which doesn't make a lot of sense because Declan is shorter than Walter Clay. And he's a former Marine. Why would he shoot from up above and down? We posit that in the course of this struggle, when that gun comes up to the pectoral muscle of Walter, his back is at this angle. And so if I'm shot and the bullet goes through, it's going to go through this way, not this way. That's consistent with being over the top of somebody. And it was a chaotic scene. There's phones everywhere, there's coffee mugs, there's a speaker, and the dogs are going nuts. So there's evidence that something violent took place. And Declan, he staunchly maintains this version of events. He was overpowered. He was helpless. He's 66 now, but 65 at the time. He is riddled with arthritis. He has bursitis. He has 2 knee replacements. He was no match for the younger, bigger, stronger Walter. And he did fear for his life in that moment. A reasonable person would fear for their life in that moment. And unfortunately, a decision was made that nobody should have to make. And realizing that Walt had been shot, what does Deck do? He doesn't run, he doesn't leave the park. Remember, there's nobody else around. He calls 911 immediately. And when you listen to the call, listen to the raw emotion, listen to the anguish, listen to the torture in his voice. The torture that is consistent with someone who was forced to take a life to protect their own. Not a hate-filled killer, not somebody who just walked in to the park and picked a fight and shot somebody. You wouldn't have that much of a visceral reaction to it. And when law enforcement arrives, they find Deck peaceful, hands up. He had made sure the gun was secure, set it far away, and just stood and waited for police. And at this time, this poor man is in complete and utter shock. He couldn't even remember his name when asked by police. He stumbled over it. They had to take his license out of his wallet. He is breaking out in these spontaneous bursts of, he's sobbing, he's hyperventilating. Everything about Declan's behavior is consistent with someone who was just traumatized by taking a life to protect his own. And if that behavior was not consistent, give that man an Oscar, because that was an Oscar-worthy performance. Now, by this time, an investigation has commenced, and I use the term investigation loosely. Deck, he is taken by detectives down to the station to do an interview. And Deck gives several interviews with the police. He is always cooperative. He is always remorseful. And he is always forthcoming. Are there variances in his account? Yes, there are. But as you can imagine, as anybody can understand, that as that shock of the day's events, especially immediately preceding, and that adrenaline leaves your body and your mind can visualize and time passes, of course you're going to start remembering what happened once that shock is worn off. Additionally, Mr. Radford began therapy that helped him to process the things that had happened. And really, the story changes per se. He just provides law enforcement with additional information. He's not walking anything back. He's adding to it. And those are two very, very different things. Now, after his second interview with law enforcement, Mr. Radford, Declan, is provided the contact information for a victim's advocate. Now ask yourself, how many suspects are provided with a victim advocate? Why would law enforcement down the road give victim advocate information if the preceding investigation did not lead them to believe that he was a victim and that this case was self-defense? After this second interview, which was days after the incident, they didn't arrest Declan. In fact, on February 12th, law enforcement met with members of the state attorney's office. They didn't arrest Declan after that. Additionally, on February 14th, law enforcement says in their report they met with the FBI. Didn't arrest Declan after meeting with the FBI. And that is where this investigation should have stopped. Law enforcement knew this was self-defense. But law enforcement, they're spurred on, compelled by a barrage of angry emails from the witnesses that the state is going to put up there, and by political motivations. Not new evidence. The evidence in the story remained the same. The only thing that changed from the beginning of February to March 8th, 40 days later, when they arrested Declan, was the public interest in this case, not evidence. Insofar as the video that the state is so heavily going to rely on, Law enforcement had that video in the very beginning of the investigation, I would say within the first week. This video that allegedly Walt's life, he had said Deck had threatened his life. Law enforcement had that video. And even that video was not significant enough to change their minds and make them arrest Declan. And I want to talk about this video because the state's going to rely on it so much. If Walt's life had been threatened, would he have gone back to the dog park at the same time as Declan, and he knows Declan will be there, and furthermore, go in knowing you're alone in there with him? Wouldn't he call law enforcement? He doesn't. In fact, 2 years leading up to this incident, Walt never contacts law enforcement about anything that happened at the dog park. But instead, Walt decides the very next day he's going to go back to the dog park at the same time that Declan has been going to that park much longer than him, almost 10 years. So you can't tell me that there was an antagonism going back and forth. And I don't truly believe that the threat was real. And I certainly don't believe that Walt felt truly threatened. In fact, we know that Walt wasn't threatened by Deck because he says in his own words, in text messages, I'm going to quote Walter, he, meaning Declan, doesn't really intimidate me. Quote, he, meaning Declan, is weak and feeble. Quote, if he, meaning Declan, blocks my path again, I'm going to try and tackle him. Isn't it interesting that that is exactly what happened? But regardless of why Walt decided to go to the park that day, despite his life being threatened and him being in such odds and fear of Declan, he goes back. We may never know the reasons. But what we need to focus on is the tragic loss of life. That's what we're here to talk about. And I want you to ask yourself, if an innocent man who was forced to defend himself is being railroaded by the state attorney's office and by law enforcement who folded to public pressure to charge Declan and make this a hate crime. And whew, tell you, that is some leap that the state is asking you to make. To believe that just because somebody uses homophobic slurs, that they have hatred in their heart so much that they're going to go out and kill somebody, going to go out and target that person. Well, if everybody who had disdain and used foul language, if logic follows, were murderers, we have a lot of murderers out there. Everybody's got a weird uncle they invite to Thanksgiving, and you never know what's going to fall out of their mouth. This is almost ludicrous, but it's the story. That's the story that the state wants you to believe. That despite there never being any violence between them, that Declan killed Walter that day purely because he was gay. And remember, what we say.
What was that? Was that an objection? Or was that a time limit thing? Because somebody said something and she turned her head and I didn't hear what was said. And I agree with you just because, but you also can't know what somebody has in their head.
what the lawyers say, it's not evidence. This is not murder because Mr. Diaz just got up and told you it. This is not a hate crime because the state says it is. Make the state work for it.
Oh my God.
Their burden is so incredibly high, so difficult to overcome. And as Declan sits before you, he is presumed an innocent man. Do not forget that. They have to prove their story, their version of events, beyond and to the exclusion of all reasonable doubt. Evidence just doesn't support it. The evidence does not lead you safely to guilty. It just doesn't. And when you deliberate, you're going to get a lot of instructions. And one of those instructions says that if your opinion vacillates, if you waver, that, members of the jury, is reasonable doubt. Ladies and gentlemen, there are two sides to every story. And if at the end of this trial and at the end of this evidence, you do not know the truth about what happened that dreadful morning at the West Tampa Dog Park, if you do not know the truth, you must find Mr. Radford not guilty. Thank you.
All right.
Judy says there's movement in the courtroom. So let me find. Where did it go? And now I can't find it. Yay.
I don't think we provide transcripts because it's required to be done in open court. All I can
All right, StreamYard. I think this is just a question because I heard him say something about transcripts. All right.
do is permit a readback or a playback, but I don't think there's a recording. So is that correct, Madam Court Reporter? No playback? All right. So the bar has recommended certain instructions in this instance. First, the standard instruction directs or suggests they be told that transcripts are not available, but that they may have testimony read back to them. And then I can combine that with the instruction that talks about how long it's going to take the court reporter to prepare it for readback, and then tell them to discuss their request further. And if they're not able to resolve their question about the requested testimony by relying on their collective memory, they should write down as specific as a description as possible of the part of the witness's testimony they want to hear. So I can do that, or I can say no, just flat out no. So Mr. Levine?
Was it?
I'm fine with either one, Your Honor. Judge, if I could have a moment.
All right. Hate to say no because there's obviously something they cannot collectively remember, but
Judge,
you have the look of you want me to say no on your face.
I do. I should not play poker with you.
Not very good at it.
If I
Dang it.
hear that because I was in that. At any rate, have a read back done, and if they can narrow down their request further, that would be helpful. So basically, baby steps. Start with no transcripts are available. Please rely on your collective memory.
Mr. Levine?
Could you please read the request one more time?
We are requesting, I think that says court. We are requesting court transcript from Susan Detman's neighbors, Sally Bell and Nancy Jones.
Kidnapping. They're hung up on kidnapping.
I'm fine with the court doing whatever you feel is appropriate under the circumstances.
Is there some prejudice to taking two baby steps first and saying transcripts are not available? A read back may be possible, but we will need you to be more specific regarding your request or the portions.
How about 2.5 baby steps then? If you're not willing to tell them just no transcripts are available, please rely on your collective memories. Then add the step of a read back may be possible if you can narrow your request further, so that they don't come back and say we want all the testimony of both witnesses read, because that I think is a problem, because then we could get into having a read back.
All right, so let me call together these instructions. How long? Well,
30 minutes.
okay. Whether they, no matter what they want,
They were short, right?
yes, they were
They
fairly
weren't
short.
the longest witnesses in the world, but they also weren't the shortest. Judge, as I'm saying it out loud and as I'm writing it down, I'm thinking though, if we ask them to narrow their request, then that might risk the possibility of highlighting a certain piece of testimony over any other piece of testimony. So I go back to my original request of just saying that no transcripts are available.
Mr. Levine?
If we're going to say their transcripts available, I think it should be included a read back may be possible.
I'm thinking this like I said, it obviously would be helpful to know if there's a particular area that they are asking for.
The instruction suggests that I can be somewhat generous in my response, but ask them to be specific as they can. So I intend to advise them transcripts are not available, to discuss their request. If they can't resolve it with their collective memory, then they may request to have testimony read back to them, and that if they decide such a request, it should be as specific as possible.
That's acceptable to the state.
And how it will be instructed. So let me just here.
Yeah, I think they're stuck on the kidnapping too.
All right. So my intention is to advise the members of the jury you have asked that transcripts of testimony be provided for you. Members of the jury, you have asked that transcripts of certain testimony be provided for you. Transcripts are not available. However, a readback of testimony may be granted in the court's discretion. I'm going to instruct you to return to the jury room and discuss your request further. If you are not able to resolve your question about the requested testimony by relying on your collective memory, then you may request to have testimony read back to you. Again, that would be granted in my discretion, if at all. Now, if you decide to make such a request, it should be as specific as possible. You may now continue with your deliberations.
All rise, please.
Okay. So now we're gonna, I thought we were gonna jump back to our other trial, but I've lost that one now. Dang it.
I will also tell you, I don't know who told Mr. Hertel, but the jury verbally told him they want to end at 4:30 today. I did not ask him to have them put that in writing because they might change their mind. They know to tell him they want to go home for the evening. So I just left it at that. Any objection to that, Mr. Levine?
No, here.
Yes.
Don't go far.
All right.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that testimony that you're about to give in this clause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir.
Step this way. Good morning. If you would please introduce yourself and spell your name for us.
Deputy Craig Hoffman, last name is Hoffman.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Deputy Hoffman. Where are you employed?
Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office,
Now, how long have you been employed with Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office?
16 years.
Okay. And what is your current position at Hillsborough County Sheriff's
I'm on
Office?
a behavioral health squad. I deal with homeless issues.
Now, was that the same position you had on February 2nd, 2024?
Yes.
Okay. Now, were you called to a scene on February 2nd, 2024?
I wasn't called, but I self-dispatched myself, talking on the radio.
Okay.
So I went through, I wasn't too far.
Where were you called to?
Oxygen Road, the dog park.
Is that in Hillsborough County?
It is.
So what did you do when you arrived on scene?
I saw the defendant with his hands up. Me and Deputy Lowe went and secured him, put him in handcuffs.
Now, this defendant, did you find out who this man was? Were you able to identify him?
Yes.
And what was his name?
Gerald Radford.
Is this man in the room with us today?
Yes, sir.
Can you point to him and identify an article of clothing?
The gentleman in the blue jacket.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witnesses identified the defendant?
Yes.
So why'd you place Mr. Radford in handcuffs?
Well, it was a shooting call. It was him and the decedent in the park. He had his hands up. So, and I believe there's some description on the radio, not 100% on that, but I was under the belief that he needed to be secured because a shooting just occurred. So we put him in handcuffs.
So after you secured him, what did you do?
I then I left him with Deputy Lowe, and I went to do CPR on the decedent.
Now, when you attempted to render aid, what happened?
There's dogs in the park, and I believe it was the decedent's dogs. He was barking at me, kind of aggressive, and I finally got over, and I started packing the wound.
Now, were you wearing body-worn camera footage like that?
I was.
Your Honor, state request to publish State Exhibit 1.
All right.
That is the wrong one.
Judge, I apologize. I think it's the time for the redaction instruction.
All right, members of the jury, you're about to view this video recording, and I'll instruct you now that the recording has been edited to eliminate irrelevant portions that would not add to your understanding of the case. And the fact that it has been edited to take out long periods where nothing is shown, for example, or something like that, shouldn't affect your viewing of the evidence.
Now, did you hear music in the background when you were placing him in cuffs?
I don't recall that.
What's you got on the table? I
It's okay. It's okay, buddy.
Come on, our daddy's gone. Not okay. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god.
I don't know. I'm just trying to get him. I just want that dog there. Go, great kid. It's okay, buddy. It's okay, pal. Baby, Cody.
Yeah.
Lady, where did you learn to do CPR? You are not pushing hard enough.
Now, I believe you stated this, but when you were attempting to render aid, what did you notice about the victim?
Color of the skin, his chest wasn't moving, and he didn't have a pulse.
Now, what did you do after you were attempting to render aid to the victim?
After I rendered aid, then I just sat with Deputy Will as well. Mr. Radford was detained.
A moment to confer, Your Honor.
Those poor dogs.
State passes the witness, Your Honor.
Right. Russ?
Oh,
Morning, Deputy Hoffman, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Fair to say you were probably the first person to encounter Mr. Radford?
That's the second person.
Okay,
Deputy Will was ahead of me,
okay, but you all kind of arrived at the same time.
pretty much.
And isn't it true that at some point during your interaction with my client, he told you, hey, there's a sign, I think there might be security video?
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
I don't,
Overruled.
I don't recall.
Isn't it true, Deputy Hoffman, that when you first encountered my client, he was in shock
Yes.
and he seemed confused?
Yes.
And he was exhibiting real emotions. You saw him crying
Yes.
and hyperventilating.
Yes.
He remained cooperative, didn't he?
Yes.
And he stayed in the park after this happened, correct?
He did.
And he called 911.
To my knowledge, he did.
And you saw noticeable injuries to his face.
Yes.
And was there a lot of blood?
I don't recall. I think there was a little bit of blood on his face. Not exactly. I forget how much it was.
At this time, defense would like to introduce and publish what's already been stipulated to as defenses one.
All right.
Okay.
Later. Do you recognize this, deputy?
I do.
And is that the face of my client as you met him in the park that morning?
Yes,
And are these the clothes that he was wearing?
I believe so.
And is that blood down the front of his shirt?
I see it on the, yeah, some blood on the lettering there.
And you attended to Mr. Lay, correct?
Yeah, I called EMS.
Okay. And at that time that Mr. Lay was still on the ground, were you able to notice anything about his condition?
Say it one more time, please.
Were you able to notice anything about the condition of his body? Did you notice the dirt that was on his legs?
I know he was dirty. I don't remember where the dirt was.
At this time, we would like to introduce and publish what's been stipulated as defenses number 2.
All right.
Deputy Hoffman, is that what his legs looked like after?
I believe so.
And you mentioned that you had to put handcuffs on Mr. Radford.
Right.
Sir, did you do that because you were scared?
I had some fear. Shooting just occurred, so.
What were you, but you weren't afraid in that moment of Mr. Radford. It's protocol, right?
I wasn't, but yeah, a shooting just occurred, so I don't know what his mindset is.
So would you say that agree that it's a matter of protocol, and it wasn't because in that moment he was acting violent?
No, he was not. It's protocol.
And he was definitely not being arrested and taken into custody.
He was being detained as far as I understood at that time.
A moment to confirm, please, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
Hoffman, I have no further questions for you. Thank you, sir.
Anything else from the state?
Now I'm gonna redirect you to what has been marked as Defense Exhibit 1. Now, let's see. Now the blood that is on his shirt, does that correlate with what the blood has been dripping off his nose when you observed him on scene?
I would assume so.
A moment to confer, Your Honor. No further questions from the state, Your Honor.
All right. You can step down, sir. Thank you. Is he released from his subpoena?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Call your next witness.
State will call Detective Smith, Your Honor. Yes, Kelsey Davis, who's now Kelsey Nix.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you, ma'am.
Oh my God, he does. Does look like Rick.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor.
If you would please introduce yourself and spell your name for us.
My name is Detective Kelsey Nix, N-I-C-K-S. At the time of the investigation, it was Davis.
Thank you.
Detective Nix, you answered my first question right off the bat, so I do appreciate that. Good morning. Where are you employed, Detective Nix?
I'm employed with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office,
Okay, how long have you been employed there?
approximately 9 years now.
Okay, and where are you currently assigned?
I'm assigned to the homicide section.
Now, was that the same position you had on February 2nd, 2024?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Now, were you called to a scene that day?
I was.
Okay. What were you called to?
I was contacted by my supervisor at the time, Sergeant Florio, and he advised that I was to respond to the shooting investigation.
Where was the shooting investigation?
West Park.
Okay. Is that in Hillsborough County?
It is.
Okay. So when you arrived on scene, what were you asked to do? What were your duties?
Upon arrival, I was tasked with overseeing the scene investigation.
Okay. Now, tasked with overseeing the scene investigation, what do you do in that task?
Typically, it's to document any evidence that may or may not be present at scene, and to kind of oversee photographs that are taken, look for any evidence that may or may not contribute to the investigation.
Okay, so what'd you start with first?
So typically, I arrive on scene, and first thing that I usually do is attend a briefing with other members of the homicide section.
Okay, and what'd you do from there?
From there, I spoke with Sergeant Florio as well as Deputy Barrios, who briefed me regarding the incident.
Okay, and then after that, what happened?
After that, a scene walkthrough was eventually conducted, and then I, along with CSI Maloney, conducted the photographs of the incident scene and began to examine items of evidence.
Now, when you say that you observed the scene with crime scene investigator Winnie, so that means you took photos, looked at evidence that you observed on scene, and processed the scene with crime scene investigator Winnie. Is that correct?
I did not take any photographs, but yes.
You were with crime scene investigator Winnie who took the photos.
Correct.
Okay, so you observed all these photos taken.
Correct.
Okay. Now, after that, did you do anything else when you're on scene?
Prior to doing 911 phone call.
Okay. Go through the scene to look for anything in particular.
We were conducting general observations at first, and we eventually progressed to a narrower scope of items that we were looking for.
Now, were you trying to observe anything else, like shell cases or anything else when you are on scene?
Yes.
Okay, so what did you do to try to find those shell casings?
Initially, we began, prior to photographs being taken, we try not to disturb items as they are. We try to keep the crime scene as is until photographs are taken. Eventually, we do conduct a thorough line search of the area in an attempt to locate that casing.
Now, what is a line search?
It's typically various members of law enforcement, the crime scene, deputies, detectives. We pace ourselves out at various increments, covering a designated area, and then we will begin to search in a linear pattern on either side, progressing through the designated area to be searched.
Now, besides the stuff you already observed and took in the photos that were already taken, did you find anything during that line search?
Yes,
What did you find?
I believe 45 caliber casings.
Now, but were those shell casings in any relation to the firearm that was found by the defendant? That was the defendant's firearm.
No, at the time we located those casings, the firearm we had already located that had been designated in this investigation was a 9mm.
Now, was a diagram created of the scene?
Yes, it was.
Okay. State would ask to publish State Exhibit 3, Your Honor. Okay, I'm gonna try to zoom this out to the best of my ability. Okay. Now, can you tell me what this right here at the top is? What am I looking at here?
Within West Dog Park, there
Yeah.
was a covered picnic table, and it was like an open pavilion.
And now these yellow markers all over the diagram, are these the evidence markers that you've tagged on the scene with your crime scene investigator?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, what is these green shrubbery things that I'm seeing on the diagram?
Throughout the dog park, there were several large trees that provided quite a bit of shade throughout the park.
Okay. And what is this circle within a circle in a square that I'm looking at on the diagram?
Under one of the trees was an area kind of designated as a watering station for dogs. There were various large troughs that could be filled with water.
Okay. And is this the path of travel to come in or out near the pavilion?
Yes, those are they're a set of sidewalks that led into the park through a series of chain link gates and into the fenced enclosure.
Okay. And then up at the top left corner is these are the markers of the items that you discovered on scene.
That's correct.
Now, as we discussed, you said that multiple photos were taken of the scene. Is that correct?
Correct.
State would ask to publish State Exhibit 2, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm looking at State Exhibit 2A. Can you please tell me what that is?
That is the entrance to the dog park. We're going to delve into the larger dog park area. Is going to be on the right side gate, right, the one that's covered in crime scene tape.
Now, and then I'm showing you what has been marked as State Exhibit 2B. Can you please tell me what that is?
That is through the initial gate into a holding area. That is the second gate that leads into the large dog area of West Dog Park.
And then 2C. Is this another entrance photo of the dog park?
Yes, it is.
And then 2D, is this another photo basically showing an expanded view of the dog park in question?
Yes, that's
Okay. Now, in 2E, is this the watering hole? I'm going to describe it as a watering hole or watering area for the animals that we just discussed in the diagram.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And what's been marked as 2F, is this the pavilion that we discussed that you said was on the diagram?
Yes.
Okay. So this is one of the walkways to enter to go to that pavilion.
Correct.
In 2G, is this just another photo regarding that pavilion that we discussed?
Yes, it is.
Now, in 2I, were there items, some of these items that you discovered on scene in this photo?
Yes.
What were some of those items that you discovered?
That orange item, kind of in the lower center portion of the photograph, was an orange Bose speaker, and that cell phone more to the right in the center of the photograph on the sidewalk was a cell phone.
Did you discover whose items those were?
I did not.
Okay, but they were, you later on, law enforcement discovered whose items those were,
Yes,
and whose items were they?
the defendants.
That
And
might
now
even on.
2I, is this the inside of the pavilion?
Yes, it is.
Now, what is inside the pavilion? A pavilion that's been marked off in this photo.
On the picnic table, on the lower right side of the photograph, we located what appeared to be a multicolored beanie hat, as well as a firearm and a casing, or sorry, a magazine for that firearm.
Now in 2L, is this with the crime scene ticket? Is this where you discovered where the shooting occurred?
From what was indicated, yes.
In 2K, there is a lot of remnants of what it seems. What are these remnants here that I'm pointing at next to the fire hydrant?
So those various kind of hoopers and wrappings were left over from medical attention that was provided to the decedent in this case. Because kind of fire rescue had left those supplies there prior to law enforcement arrival.
Now, does that occur occasionally when fire rescue is attempting to render aid to a victim, that sometimes supplies are left when rendering aid?
Yes, it does.
Oh, yeah. They do not clean up after themselves.
2L, is this, now are these items over here that you soon discover other items of evidence that you found?
Yes, they are.
What items were those?
I believe that they were two thermos style cups.
In 2M, were these the thermos style cups that you just discussed?
Yes.
Now, was there another pair of sunglasses you also found on scene?
Yes.
And were those pair of sunglasses the defendants?
Yeah, identified episodes, yes.
State would ask to publish State Exhibits 4A through I, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I know we discussed this, but we're going to go into more detail. These photos regarding 4A, as we discussed before, these are with markers now. Are these the markers you left for the items you discussed previously?
Yes, those are the markers, yes, I know in place.
Okay. And the markers that are placed, are these next to the phone and the speaker that you discovered?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, for B, is this a close-up of that speaker and phone?
Yes, it is.
And for C, is that the speaker again?
Yes, it is.
Did you notice anything out of the ordinary? Did you notice any sand or debris on that speaker when you found it?
Nothing that would appear out of the ordinary for it being on the ground.
And 4D, is that same speaker?
Yes, it is.
Now in 4E, as you discussed briefly, again, what is this?
That was the multicolored kind of beanie style hat that we located, as well as the firearm and the magazine.
And at this point, those had been marked as evidence, right?
Correct.
And 4F, is this just a close-up of the firearm and ammo that you discovered on scene with Mawini?
Yes, that's correct.
And 4G, is that the defendant's firearm that you discovered on scene with Mawini?
Yes.
And 4H, is it that same firearm just flipped over?
Yes.
And 4I, what am I looking at here?
That was the magazine that was located next to the firearm, as well as the rounds of ammunition that were previously loaded into that magazine.
And you didn't find any additional ammo on scene, is that right?
Correct.
State would ask to publish 7A through M, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. Now, in State Exhibit 7A, now you started to mark this scene as we discussed before, and some of the items you began to mark were these, the thermoses and sunglasses that you discovered on scene with Mawini?
Yes.
Okay. Now, was this just a close-up photo in 7B of those thermoses and sunglasses that you observed near the watering hole?
Yes.
Now, in 7C, you observe these, you've marked the two thermoses. Now, what was marked in marked in evidence tag 6 here?
That appeared to be a piece of plastic that resembled, at the time, what could possibly have been a handle to one of the thermoses.
Was that potentially to the mug on number 5?
Correct.
Did you discover whose mug was whose?
Yes.
Was the defendant's mug number 5?
Correct.
And 7D, is that just another close-up with the handle and the mug of the defendant's mug?
Yes.
And 7E, is that another close-up with an evidence tag next to that mug?
Yes.
And 7F, what am I observing here?
That was the area of the mug that appeared to have something broken off of it, which drew our attention to that handle.
And 7G, is that the handle you're referring to?
Yes.
in 7H, is this just another photo of that handle from the defendant's mug?
Correct.
Now in 7I, what do you know? Whose mug was this, or did you discover whose mug was this?
I did not.
Okay. Did law enforcement discover whose mug this was,
I believe so.
and whose mug was this?
The victim.
In 7L, is that just another close-up of the victim's mug?
Yes.
7K, what am I looking at here?
Those were a pair of sunglasses located at the incident scene.
And you stated those were the defendant's sunglasses?
Correct.
Okay. And in 7 sunglasses?
Yes.
Now, when you had an opportunity to look at these sunglasses with Melanie, did you notice anything out of the ordinary regarding these sunglasses? And I mean out of the ordinary, do you see anything broken, fractured, cracked regarding these sunglasses?
No, the sunglasses appear to be pretty intact when we located them.
Just a little dirt on them.
Correct.
And I'm showing you 7M. Is this just another close-up of those sunglasses?
Yes.
Okay. Now, after you and Winnie processed the scene and processed for shell casings, anything else you did on the scene that day?
Not after the line search.
Okay. Mug to confer, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. State will pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross.
Good morning, Detective. How are you today?
Well, Counselor, good morning.
How long have you been a detective?
Just about 3.5 years now.
And how long has that been in total or in part in major crimes?
3.5 years.
So, and you're still in major crimes.
Correct.
And as a major crime detective, am I accurate in my understanding that you are tasked with investigating shootings, violent crimes, more serious offenses?
That's fair to say.
Homicides?
Correct.
Do you do sex crimes at all or no?
I previously worked in the special victims section. Yes.
Would it be fair of me to say that throughout your 3.5 years, you've probably interacted with members of the community, either suspects or alleged victims that have experienced some sort of trauma?
Yes.
Would it also be fair of me to say that in those interactions, there's no consistent way that anybody responds to trauma?
That's true.
Everybody reacts differently.
Yes.
Some people can remain stoic, right?
Yes.
Others can be, emotional wrecks, right?
At times, yes.
And everything in between.
Yes.
As part of being tasked by, I believe it was Sergeant Florio,
Yes.
To assist in this investigation, kind of in the hierarchy of lead detective, assistant, where did you fall?
I was assigned as the crime scene detective.
Okay, so you were just the crime scene detective, but as I understand it, subsequent to your investigation at the crime scene, you may have been tasked with a few things here and there as follow-up investigation.
As it pertains to the scene, yes.
So as the crime scene detective, you worked hand in hand with the crime scene investigator or crime scene tech to document the scene, as we just saw the state demonstrate with a variety of photographs.
Yes.
Now, is there any way for you to tell the jury how all of the items that you just went through with Mr. Chambers ended up in their final resting places?
What do you mean, Counselor?
Well, do you know how those items ended up where they did?
since I arrived after most of the incident had already taken place, and any fire rescue had already left, and first responding deputies had already left, I can't attest to what was or was not removed during the actual incident.
The truth is, you wouldn't be able to tell the jury how many people walked through and disturbed that crime scene prior to your arrival, right?
No, I don't know.
But we both could agree that prior to your arrival, Deputy Hoffman and Lowe both arrived on scene, right?
Correct.
That deputies attempted to render life-saving aid to Mr. Lay, right?
Yes.
That EMS arrived on scene to render life-saving efforts, correct?
Yes.
Do you know how many?
That I don't know.
Do you know if they had, inartfully, one of the, like a gurney with them?
Typically, yes, in
Okay.
this particular instance.
Stripes for-
At this point, there's no crime scene log, right? There's no log keeping track of who's coming in and out.
During first initial response, I don't believe so.
Is there any way for you to tell the jury how many deputies, EMS, fire rescue people walked through that scene prior to these tags and these photographs being taken?
I don't know.
Could be dozens.
That I don't know.
The dogs were, prior to your arrival, or if you know, were running around the crime scene panicking, right?
There were 3 dogs still in the park when I arrived. Yes.
And the point I'm trying to make for the jury, and I think we're there, is that there is no way for us, as you and I sit here, to know how these items, or if these items were actually where they're tagged when this event took place. Right?
Yes.
In the interactions you had with Mr. Radford, he was cooperative?
I didn't have much interaction with Mr. Radford. Detective Herrick would have more to speak on with that.
Were you present for his interview at the station?
I was not.
Did anyone make you aware that Mr. Radford couldn't even remember his name when asked by Deputy Lowe?
No, I was not.
Are you aware, or were you made aware by either Detective Harrop or any of the deputies on scene that Mr. Radford had pointed out at the initial interaction with law enforcement a sign on the fencing that indicated the park was under video surveillance?
Objection. Calls for your second.
Overruled.
I observed the sign, yes.
So you did see that sign?
Yes.
3.5 years major crime detective, right?
Yes.
Would it make sense to you if somebody had just committed a murder? It was one of the first things to tell detectives or law enforcement, of course, after calling 911 and staying like all civilians and citizens of this country would expect somebody to do if they had to take somebody's life in self-defense. But would it make sense to you that one of the first things they say, if they had in cold blood killed somebody, oh, by the way, there's a sign, this is all recorded? Would that make sense to you as a major crimes detective?
Sustained.
The shell casings you indicated that were found, I think you said 45. If I told you that reports indicate they were 40 Smith & Wesson rounds, would that make sense?
It would.
And there's no indication that, or at least I believe I'm accurate in saying this, law enforcement deduced or assumed that those were from some other event, right?
At the time, I don't believe we could definitively say that. Well, there was nothing at the time that indicated to us that they were directly involved in the current investigation.
Knowing what we know now, we know that Mr. Radford was armed with a 9mm, right?
Yes.
And it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it. Those rounds wouldn't even fit into Mr. Radford's firearm.
I would say so, yes.
Similar questions, or in a similar vein to the questions I asked about how the items got where they got, and that nobody really knows because of the disturbance on the scene. The mugs that the state published photographs of, we also don't know how they ended up where they were, right?
Sorry, my red light, I can't say.
And what I'm getting at here is you documented them with crime scene where you found them.
That's accurate to say.
Do you recall if the handle to the mug that law enforcement ultimately determined belonged to Mr. Radford was glued on or screwed in?
That I'm not sure.
Is that something you all looked into?
That I'm not sure.
The clothes that were recovered in this case, did you have anything to do with that? Let me rephrase. The clothes that belonged to Mr. Radford.
I was present for the collection of, I believe, one article of clothing.
Which one was that?
The clothing that was recovered from, I believe, Deputy Lowe's vehicle.
Are you aware that Deputy Lowe removed that jacket or hoodie and just tossed it in the back of his vehicle?
That you'd have to ask Deputy Lowe.
When you received it, was it in an evidence bag?
I believe it had already been collected by CSI Mooney.
Now, as I understand, on March I believe it was 6th, you were tasked by Detective Harrop to go perform some type of laser measurement of a house nearby relative to the crime scene, right?
No.
You were not?
No.
Do you know who that was?
I do not.
you gonna ask another question? Are you thinking what's happening here? Did the hamster stop running on its wheel in your brain or what?
Did you have any involvement in, or were you ever tasked by Detective Harrop as part of your involvement in this case in seeking, obtaining, searching for surveillance footage in the homes nearby on West Jean or West Hannah near the dog park?
By means of a neighborhood survey or something similar to that, Counselor?
In any capacity?
My only involvement was the execution of the search warrant on nearby residents that may have had video cameras that I can't recall.
Is in March?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this crime happened before, correct?
Correct.
You've been a major crimes detective for 3.5 years, right?
Correct.
Safe to say, and I think you'd agree with me as we have this conversation with in front of the jury, that if video surveillance of a self-defense situation or an alleged homicide exists, that would be one of the top priorities for you as a major crime detective to obtain, correct?
Correct.
And as a 3.5 year, I would call you a veteran major crimes detective, that you're going to place a high priority on it, not or describe for the jury why at times surveillance footage is top.
On some cases, some cameras can overwrite data, but not all. And sometimes that data can be erased due to memory capacity. I'm not certified in any kind of digital evidence capacity.
And nor am I. However, I think from your experience, you've gleaned that whether it's a 7-Eleven or a home surveillance system, the amount of time that evidence exists can be fleeting due to the storage capacity of the device. Correct?
Sometimes.
Now, knowing that, you would place a high priority on obtaining that evidence as soon as possible, right?
In most cases.
So if you were the lead right across the street, pointing at the very location that this incident may have taken place, would you have waited till February 12th to follow up to see if you could obtain that footage?
Overruled.
It would depend on circumstances surrounding the investigation. I can't say without knowing all the details surrounding each case, Counselor.
Would you have waited until March to try to obtain a search warrant to obtain that video surveillance footage? Now, when I say March, we're talking a month after this incident took place.
That would depend on when and how I became aware of that.
For argument's sake, let's say that you, as the lead detective, were aware on day one that a camera across the street from the West Dog Park had potential surveillance footage. Would you have waited until March to try to obtain a search warrant to get it?
I would have probably attempted to try earlier. Again, I'm not the detective that attempted to get that video surveillance, Counselor.
And I understand the difficult spot I'm putting you in because you weren't the lead detective in this case. But the truth of the matter is, you would have done something day 1, day 2, or even day 3. Not 10 days later, not 2 weeks later, not a month later, right? That's the truth.
Again, it depends, Counselor.
And I can understand the difficulty that question poses for you. And I think that the nature of your response has answered my question, so I appreciate that.
May I have a moment to
The
confer, Your Honor?
nature
Sure.
of your responses has answered my question. I like the way you put that.
Judge, I'll send you the witness.
All right.
So they didn't. I'm having such a hard time hearing her. So they didn't get surveillance, or they
No.
waited.
Going off defense's hypotheticals here. Detective Nix, can you just, as a law enforcement officer, just walk into someone's house?
No, I did not.
Now, what do you need to walk into someone's house?
Typically, not in all cases, but in most, that is consent to be there. When a crime is occurring or has occurring, exigent circumstances for search warrant.
So you need consent or a search warrant?
Correct.
Or, as you said, exigent circumstances, right? Okay. So let's say someone who owns a house says they don't want you in that house. It's kind of a problem, right?
Correct,
So you need a search warrant, correct?
in most instances.
In most instances. Moment to confer, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right. You can step down. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
She released from her subpoena.
Yes, Judge.
All right. Thank you. Need a break? All right. We'll take a quick recess.
All rise.
I wish they would talk in the microphone or turn it on or whatever is causing the audio issues. It
All
was
right.
good.
We'll be in about a 10-minute recess.
Just for my own planning, we'll pick up somewhere 11:20, 11:25. I can tell you that pretty early in Detective Harris.
Raise your right hand, please.
Yes,
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that testimony that you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Step this way.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. Yes, ma'am. Good morning.
That part I got.
If you would please introduce yourself and spell your name for us.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Robert Harrop,
Yeah.
Robert, Harrop as in Papa. Yes, ma'am.
Detective, well, Mr. Harrop, are you a detective with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, sir. I'm a detective.
And what is your current assignment with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office?
I'm currently assigned to the Special Investigations Division on the Internet Predator Unit.
And so that is a different assignment than you would have had February of last year, 2024.
That is correct, sir.
What were you assigned to February 2024?
I was assigned to the,
Now you're dealing with people who are doing like child porn kind of stuff on the computer, but before you were doing homicides.
that is correct.
And how long have you been doing homicides as of February of 2024? How long have you been doing
Well, I was on the actual homicide section at that point for a bit under a year. Prior to that, I worked death investigations in the Special Investigations Division involving narcotics-related homicides as they relate to.
And that's what you've been doing in the recent history. How long have you been with HCS? So in total?
I started with the Sheriff's Office September 12th of 2010, so a little over 14 years.
Were you called to the scene of West Dog Park on Occident Street on the date of February 2nd, 2024?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Explain to the jury, how does a detective get called to a scene? How does all that work? What comes in the immediate moments thereafter?
So typically a call goes out section. It is a homicide. The supervisors are commonly made aware of the incident by somebody on patrol or, another supervisor. The supervisors then will task the detectives on the squad with where to go. In this case, it was 6402 North Occident, which is West Dog Park. And then commonly the supervisors will additionally provide a set of tasks or give you, an assignment as it relates to the actual investigation itself. So pretty much always comes from the supervisor.
And what kind of assignments get handed out by the supervisor?
Supervisor will commonly assign like a lead detective, somebody to assist them, a crime scene detective. There's an array of different assignments, but there's multiple for every homicide.
And so a scene detective, what is their responsibility?
Their responsibility is to focus primarily on the crime scene itself, to document the facts.
What just happened? That's on their end. No, that's on their end. That's not on my end.
To a suspect or things like that?
No, usually it's pretty singular focused. Sometimes we have more than one crime scene. There might be two assigned, to go to different places, but it's pretty singular focused on the actual crime scene itself and the evidence.
And who was the crime scene detective in this particular case where Gerald Radford is the accused?
Detective Kelsey Davis.
She's now Kelsey Nix?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe so.
Right, okay. What assignment were you given then?
I was assigned the lead detective role.
And what does a lead detective do compared to like a scene detective?
Most commonly, we're tasked with doing interviews of involved parties, and then, in essence, filtering the information and mainly focusing on the actual interviews themselves is the primary.
So you talk about there's a lead detective, there's a scene detective, and then there's other detectives that might get assigned to other tasks. There's other tasks that might get assigned, like looking for other potential witnesses, like going into the neighborhood and see if anybody by chance heard anything.
Certainly, yeah. So oftentimes on homicides, that's also a task of patrol deputies. But if we are in a neighborhood or something like that, those tasks could include a detective being specifically assigned to what we call a neighborhood survey, with go to nearby homes and things to try to talk to people, see if they can develop witnesses. And that can be a primary focus, or there might be multiple tasks that detective is given, but that could be one of the tasks.
We live in a modern age, digital age, is another task that might get assigned to going and looking for surveillance camera, video footage, things like that.
Correct.
Yes. So when the scene, when the investigation initially starts, you got one detective at the scene, you got a lead detective out talking to people, and you got other detectives maybe doing whatever else might be needed.
That is correct.
And that's the standard sort of operating procedure in any homicide investigation.
That's correct.
So in this case, did you end up responding to the scene at West Dog Park to just initially go there and see what you could determine from the evidence itself that was like visible?
So yes, sir. I did respond there. The call initially came out at 7:55 a.m. My supervisor was made aware of it, Sergeant Florio. He advised me of the incident at around 8:50 a.m. And then I departed our office and arrived at the park at, I believe, 9:31 a.m. And that was my initial response was the West Dog Park.
All right. So I want to clarify, make sure they heard that. What time do we believe the incident occurred? What are we using as a point of reference?
So the call itself was memorialized as approximately 07:55, so 7:55 a.m.
And when you say the call, do you mean a 911 call?
Correct. So that's the call I look at that's imported into the computer system. It was imported at 7:55 a.m.
All right. And just while we're talking about the 911 call, I'm going to go ahead and play what has been admitted as State's Exhibit number 15. The disc is over there, but I have it here.
February 2024, 07:55 and 07 seconds.
911, do you need police, fire, or medical? Hello, 911. Hang on. Hello? Hello, 911. Do you need police, fire, or medical? Yeah, please. I just got these people up at West Dog Park. Can you repeat that, sir? West Dog Park. I just attacked, and I have to defend myself. I had to shoot somebody. Sir, what is the address that you are at? It's Occidental Road, West Shaw Park.
Detective, I played the first 53 seconds or so. Just want to ask, this 911 call we're listening to, this is the 911 call you heard, right?
That is correct, sir.
There's not been any sort of audio enhancement or change or anything?
No, sir.
The reason why I ask is I don't hear any music playing.
But neither do I, sir.
And do you have a weapon on you, sir? I do have a weapon, and I'm unloading it, and it's on the table. I think you might be dead. And about how long does this occur? Minutes. I called as soon as I could dial the number. On the table, so are you in a house? No, I'm at a dog park. And who did you shoot? This guy is constant. You have no idea what's going on? Yeah, I've been having trouble with this guy for months and months and months. I'll explain to you please from the get-go. Oh my God. And you are still outside that dog park? What are you wearing so that you can see him? I'm sitting at the table in a camouflage jacket and jeans. Oh my God. Camouflage jacket and jeans? Yeah. And where's the victim? Where is that guy? He's just lying on in the park. You said he's in the park? Where in the park? He's just lying in the park, man. Oh, God. What is your name, sir? Gerald. G-E-R-A-L-D. And
Detective, I think I hear the voice saying Gerald, G-E-R-A-L-D. Is that the spelling of the defendant's name as you know it?
Yes, sir.
You didn't spell it incorrectly, did it?
No, sir.
Was there a pause between where they ask, what's your name, sir? And he says immediately, Gerald? Is there some pause that we edited out?
No, sir.
The person you shot, what is he wearing? Shorts and a jacket. What color shorts, sir? Gray, brownish gray. Oh, man. You got anything? And last I recall, you said you were by the table. Are you still at that table, sir? Yeah, I'm right here. And is the weapon still on that table? Yes, it is. And you said you unloaded the weapon? Yeah. Oh, and it's that table you're sitting at, correct? Yes. And how many times did you shoot him, sir? One. And where was he shot at? I don't know.
Detective, we just heard Mr. Radford say, I don't know, and ask where he shot Mr. Lay. Do you, later on in the investigation, get to interview Mr. Radford back at like the HDSO district station?
Yes, sir. I interviewed him at our District 3 office.
And how much time, this is 7:55, they're approaching, somewhere right before 8 o'clock. What time do you think you interview Mr. Radford when you're back at the station?
Maybe around 10:30. I'm not sure the exact time.
So 2.5 hours later.
Yes, sir.
By the time we get to 2.5 hours later, we haven't gotten there yet, but in the interview, Mr. Radford, is he able to give you very specific details about where he shot Mr. Lay?
Yes, sir.
He grabbed hold of me and I'm about to be on the ground. I was scuffling around in the ground. And I had to grab him, hit me in the face with his fucking cuffs.
I know that's how you stop one. Ma'am.
Aye, sir, and I just want to confirm, you're still at that table, correct? I'm sitting in the area of the table, the gun's on the table underneath my hat. And when you say you're in the area of the table, where exactly are you? Just like, you walk in the gate and it's a table. You walk in the gate of the dog park, there's a table just to the right, under a gazebo. I'm under the gazebo.
Detective, you've been to this dog park. In terms of the description of you go through the gate, you walk through the gate, I'm at the gazebo, all those. That's a correct recitation of what the scene is like, right?
That is correct. When you walk through the pedestrian gate, there's a sidewalk that leads to a covered like picnic style table under a gazebo.
We haven't heard it, but I want to make sure. Is there some part of the video, the audio that's edited out where Mr. Radford is slurring his words, responding incoherently, just babbling about something, making any sort of indication? He doesn't know where he is, what he's doing, what the scene looks like. Any of that?
No, sir.
He sounds
He's about 25 yards away.
not incoherent though.
You said he's about 25 yards away from you? Yeah. I had to shoot him with laughing. He attacked me. I had to shoot him. Hello there, sir. Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and get you over to the fire rescue. Please do not hang up. I won't. I'm sorry.
Hillsborough County Fire Rescue, what is the address of the emergency?
It's at Oxford Road, West Village, West Park, Dog Park. I see a police car coming now.
Okay, is this, somebody was shot?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you the victim or are you with the patient?
No, I'm the to do it.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you said.
I'm the guy who has to do it.
Oh, okay. So you're calling 911 for the person that was shot?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. You see the police officer? Can you flag them down?
Thank you.
Okay, I'll let you go talk to them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Detective, towards the back end of the call there, we heard Mr. Radford saying things like, I had to shoot him. He attacked me. He attacked me. I had to shoot it. I'm the guy who had to do it. There's some missing part of the call when you heard it that's not here now, where he said, I thought I was going to die. I thought he was going to kill me. I thought he was going to pound my face in. I thought he was going to make me a cripple for the rest of my life. Anything like that?
No, sir, that was not stated.
All right, so now you arrive at the park. You know that this is already a self-defense claim, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, I want to talk with you because I'm sure the jury doesn't have any understanding of how this normally works. When a homicide occurs, you get called out to the scene, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Do members of my office, the state attorney's office, particularly homicide prosecutors, get called to the scene?
Yes, sir.
And I wasn't the original prosecutor on this, correct?
That is correct, sir.
But when an investigation of a homicide occurs, there are things for which you sometimes need a lawyer, like you want to get a search warrant approved or you want a subpoena issued, correct?
That is correct, sir.
And we assist you in that.
Yes, sir, you do.
But there is also an agreement between the sheriff's office and the state attorney's office that arrests are not made without the state attorney's office signing off on it, correct?
That is correct, sir.
So it's not like you can just decide to make an arrest on your own if you really wanted to.
Not regarding an investigation like this, sir.
Well, I mean, I guess you could, but then your boss and my boss would probably have a conversation with each other.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so when it's a self-defense case, is there also another step where sometimes HCSO homicide detectives like yourself have to come to my office and actually make a presentation to what's called the homicide committee?
That is correct, sir.
So that's a whole nother step,
Yes, sir.
again, to decide whether or not an arrest is going to occur.
That is correct, sir.
Would it be fair to say that some of the prosecutors in the room can make you want to have to jump through all the hoops before a decision is made?
Absolutely, sir.
So you arrive at the scene and you know that you're already working on a self-defense claim. I just want to ask you about this picture, which is State's Exhibit 2E. Let me click over that, sorry. Here in 2E, we can see this area in the dead center of the picture, just to the right of the tree. There's kind of this brightly colored bucket, it looks like, on the ground. What is this area?
It's like a dog watering type area. I think there's like some concrete there, a couple of like Rubbermaid or like plastic bins that contain water.
Okay, and so even here in this early picture, you can just make out to the right of this sort of T-shaped wooden structure, there's something blue here on the ground. Do you know what that is?
Like a travel style mug.
Some kind of mug or something.
That is correct, sir.
Okay, and so, you know, angles in pictures can be a little confusing or a little deceptive sometimes, but this doesn't appear to be right next to this fire hydrant, for example.
It is not, sir.
Now, as part of the investigation, you know that other deputies would have responded first, like initial responding deputies, and that many of those deputies wear what are commonly known as body-worn cameras.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit number 1. I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit. Oh, it's not on the screen, sorry. There we go. Is that the defendant wearing the camouflage jacket?
Yes, sir, it is.
I can hear singing. Someone is singing, "I'll send an SOS to the world." I'm a little bit of a fan of classic rock. I think that's the Police, "Message in a Bottle."
I'm not super familiar with
Yes,
that song,
it is.
but there's definitely a song in the background.
I mean, you don't expect that HCSO deputies are walking around with portable speakers on them playing music when they're conducting an investigation, do you?
No, sir.
What's that on the table?
I'm just going to back up a second there because we got a semi-decent view of it. The defendant is wearing blue jeans, right?
That is correct, sir.
And we can see he's wearing a camouflage jacket. Did you ultimately discover the defendant had on sort of layers that day because it's February and it's cold?
Yes, sir.
Did he have on like a camouflage jacket over like a black hoodie, over like a green sweater, and then sort of like one of those blue sort of shirts that's like to wick moisture off of you?
That is correct.
So he's wearing multiple layers, but he appears his outer layer is jeans on the bottom half of his body, correct?
That is correct, sir.
So I'm going to jump ahead here.
That's how you
The
get
deputy
from Florida.
approaches the dogs. All right, here at 59 seconds, I can see this bright yellow bucket and this sort of T-shaped structure. Is that the same water area we saw before?
Correct, sir.
And then we can see the body and the dog in the distance here to the right and the fire hydrant, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, it's okay. I know. It's okay, buddy. It's okay.
Detective, I'm going to point here with the mouse. There appears to be an object right here-ish to the right of the T-shaped wood structure, and another one here-ish to the right of that, between a little closer to the body of the victim, but right at the edge of where you can see the gray dirt. When you were at the scene, did you see items on the ground there?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you see the blue travel mug?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you also see a darker blue thermos mug with a broken handle?
Yes, sir.
This would be the first responding deputies, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Based on the video, it doesn't look like any other deputies have walked through the scene. First emergency rescue, like the EMS guys haven't gotten there yet. Gurneys haven't been wheeled through. Nobody's appeared to have walked through there from law enforcement or EMS to have disturbed the scene, does it?
No, sir. They were the first to arrive.
Here I'm at 127. That object appears to be blue, the one that I pointed out earlier, correct?
Correct, sir.
And now at 132, does that look like the blue travel mug and the blue thermos mug as you found them at the scene later on when Mr. Radford does what's called a walkthrough and actually says, that's my mug and that's the victim's mug?
Yes, sir.
All right, so you now arrived at the scene. You become aware of the fact that there is a person being detained, and that is Mr. Radford, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And when you met Mr. Radford, had he already removed some layers of clothing?
Yes, sir, he had.
What layers had he already moved at that point?
I believe at that point, the camouflage jacket that was in the video was removed. I believe there was also underneath that a black hooded like sweatshirt with some white on it that had been removed. And I believe when I arrived, he was wearing a kind of olive drab green in color like sweater, basically.
Right, and so here is Defense Exhibit 1. Let me put that up there on the screen for you. Is this what you understand Mr. Radford originally would have looked like? Camouflage jacket, black hooded sweatshirt, and then some maybe your green sweat blue.
Yes, sir. Prior to my arrival, yes, sir.
All right, and here on the front of the hoodie, does this appear to be of note to you? What does this look like to you?
Suspected blood.
But also in this picture, Mr. Radford appears to have blood dripping down his nose, correct?
That is correct, sir.
So, detective, you are not the scene detective, but still you are aware of a few things that are recovered at the scene, correct?
That is correct, sir.
One of which is a firearm.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Specifically, the firearm that is admitted here as, I believe it states Exhibit 5. Can I get the thing? Yeah, I'm just going to get the tag off so people can see it. That's a little better. All right, detective, is this firearm?
Yes, sir.
Specifically, is this what's called a semi-automatic firearm?
That is correct, sir.
People may have watched cowboy movies and seen the old style cowboy movies with like the cylinder in the middle that spins and all of that. That's not a semi-automatic. That's like a revolver.
Correct, sir.
How does a semi-automatic work? You carry one, something similar to this for work, right?
Yes, sir.
There's this other object over here. What is this?
Magazine, which holds the ammunition.
All right, so if you wanted to load this gun, assuming you had bullets, what would be the process one goes through?
You would load the magazine initially with your bullets, and then towards the bottom of that grip is where that inserts, the mag insert. After it was loaded with the bullets, you would put the magazine actually into the gun and secure it. And then in order to chamber around, in essence, or make it to where it was ready to shoot, the slide, which is the upper portion, which contains both the rear and front sight, you would pull that back and let it move forward to basically put the round inside the gun itself.
Okay, and so the gun would, for example, this will be easier with a picture. You pull this part up here, is this the slide?
Yes, sir.
You pull that back, it releases whatever mechanism or whatever, and then slides forward so that the bullet is chambered and the gun is ready to be fired.
That is correct, sir.
And so, oh, I'm sorry, for the record, I am showing State's Exhibit 4H. That's the picture I was showing. When a person has a gun, people talk about guns jamming. Is that what's also commonly called a stovepipe? Is that a type of jam?
Yeah, that could be a malfunction that semi-automatics have.
Tell the jury what a stovepipe is for anybody who doesn't know.
So I'm no gun expert, but in essence,
Well, are you trained to clear a gun jam like a stovepipe?
for sure, yeah. So
Okay.
I just don't know how eloquently I can explain this, but in essence, whenever you fire the round, the slide kicks back and ejects the spent casing, which the bullet was, originally in.
So I'm watching a movie like John shooting a gun. I see bullets flying out the side.
Correct. For a semi-automatic firearm. So if the slide or, if it doesn't come back completely, when the bullet goes to eject, it goes forward prior to the bullet fully ejecting, it'll get caught inside of the port that it's supposed to eject from. And in essence, whenever the malfunction occurs, it doesn't allow another round to go in. It blocks the slide from moving all the way forward, and it looks like a stovepipe, if you will, because the round is sticking up, kind of facing, upward.
So looking at States 4H again, this sort of indentation here in the slide, this is where a bullet or a spent casing would normally eject from the gun.
That is correct.
The actual bullet goes out the front of the gun, so that's a spent casing.
The spent casing comes out of that ejection port.
But you talk about it can get like stuck standing sort of straight up and prevent the slide from going back and forth.
Correct.
What is the process by which you clear that?
Well, you'd have to pull the slide all the way back, clear the round from the slide, and then, in essence, allow the slide to go back forward to rechamber around.
All right, and so if a bullet is sort of stovepipe here, standing up, you pull the slide all the way back, that releases the tension on the stovepipe and it can be ejected, basically.
Yeah, correct, sir.
Once you've ejected the stovepipe and released the slide, what happens to the bullets in the magazine?
The would then, enter into the, would become available.
It goes from the magazine up into the chamber?
That's correct.
So here is State's Exhibit 4I. Are you aware of the fact that the gun was recovered with ammunition in the magazine?
Correct, sir.
All right, and so this magazine appears to hold 6 bullets because it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you can put one more in, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, and there appears to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullets in the magazine as it was found by the crime scene detectives and the crime scene investigators, correct?
Yes, sir.
So, maybe the jury doesn't know this. Theoretically, put 6 rounds into the magazine of a gun, put the magazine at the bottom of the gun, like, load the gun basically, rack a bullet or pull the slide back to put one in the chamber. I could pull the magazine back out, which would now only have 5 because one went into the chamber, and I could put one more back in the magazine, right?
Correct.
Like, for example, you carry a firearm. How many does your magazine hold?
I think these are 16 plus 1 or 17 plus 1. So we load it to max capacity, chamber around, drop our mag, put the other bullet in there, and then the mag is at max capacity and there's one in the chamber.
And is that why you call it 16 plus 1 or 17 plus 1? Because it's 16 or 17 in the mag and plus 1 in the chamber?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Radford also ultimately tells you, we'll get to the interview, but he ultimately tells you that he carries his gun with 1 in the chamber and the mag fully loaded.
He does state that.
So that would suggest 7 bullets.
That would be correct, sir.
And so we are under the impression, all indications point to, we have no reason to doubt that there's only 1 gunshot in this case.
Correct, sir.
So 6 bullets in the mag and 1 that got fired, correct?
Correct, sir.
But if the first one was a stovepipe and you had to clear it, we should have found the spent shell casing, shouldn't we?
Correct, sir.
Did we find a spent shell casing?
Crime scene or the sheriff's office did not locate a spent shell casing.
I mean, there was a whole line search conducted to try and find casings, and we actually found casings for some 40 caliber gun that's not in any way related to this, right?
Yeah, yes, sir. I was advised that.
So you found casings, just not the one we actually needed.
That is correct, sir.
But also, if there were 6 in the mag, and then the 1 in the chamber, the 1 in the chamber stovepipes, 1 from the mag should have gone into the chamber, right?
If it was properly cleared, yes, sir.
But in this case, we found the mag fully loaded, right?
That is correct, sir.
The only way that happens is somebody has to eject the magazine, take the round out of the chamber. You have to eject a live round, and then put a live round back into the magazine, right?
Yes, sir.
I don't mean to suggest that's the most difficult thing in the world to do, but I mean, that takes a little bit of focus and attention, doesn't it?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Diaz, is this a good time?
If you want to, yes, Your Honor, yes.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take our lunch break at this time. Same admonition I always give you about no discussion about the case, no coming to any definite fixed or final opinions on the merits of the case. I will see you back here at 1:15. Enjoy your lunch.
All right.
Okay. We are done for the day. So, tomorrow, what's tomorrow? Wednesday. Karen Reed is Thursday. Tomorrow, we're going to try to get caught up to live on this one. I don't know what we're going to do Thursday. What is all over my computer screen? It looked like I had something coming out of my nose. Oh, I know what it was. I did my nails yesterday. It was probably the dust from the nail stuff. I guess we'll play it by ear Thursday because we're going to have a trial and a hearing, and then my internet's going to be being worked on in the afternoon, so we'll just play it by ear. And Judy, well, I'll talk to you and figure out when you're leaving and all that kind of stuff. So just show up at 9. We'll figure it out. I'll be here. Oh, that's right. Tomorrow. That's Thursday. Wait. I'm so confused. Tomorrow's Wednesday, right? Yes. Tomorrow's Wednesday. Thursday. Tomorrow we're doing this trial. I don't even know. Where's my head? I don't know where my head is half the time. Okay. So tomorrow we're getting caught up to the live on this trial. And then we will jump over to the Griffith verdict if we have one tomorrow. And on Thursday, we're going to wing it. We're going to do what we can do when we can do it. And then hopefully I'll have decent internet by Friday. And again, we will have the same problem with a hearing and a trial both to cover. But we'll do it. We'll figure it out. We'll get it done. So once again, I'm just left with my OGs at the end of the day. So I love you guys. And replay crew, I love you too. This has been a big mashup of 2 trials and me just being me. And I'm going to try to separate it out. The last time I did that, I was not able to. The last time I did a mashup like this, I just changed the thumbnail to show that there were 2 different things going on. So I don't know what's going to happen, but it doesn't matter. I don't know. So I'll see you guys in the morning at 9 o'clock. Bye. Have a good evening. Love y'all.